So just to introduce you to who you will be interacting with on the line today. So myself, Daniela Kwiatkowski, I'm the Manager of Training and Development here at MHS. Katie Ramatar is the Manager of R&D Talent Assessments, and she will be moderating the questions. David Wieczorek is our Senior Technical Writer in the User Experience Group, and he will be presenting to you on generating and inviting people to take the assessment later on in our webinar. And Justin Dionerine is a research analyst in our R&D Talent Assessments group. He is intimately involved as he was part of the responsible for developing the Leadership EQ 360 report, and he will be speaking to you shortly about that report. We have a lot of people on the line who may not be familiar with who we are. So MHS is a worldwide trusted publisher of psychological assessments and services. Our home base is in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and we publish assessments in the clinical, education, public safety, and talent assessments area. And this particular assessment is housed under our talent assessments group, but it's important for us to talk a little bit about our different divisions as we use the same scientific rigor that goes into developing an assessment, for example, that we use to assess children for autism. We need to make sure that that is an accurate result. We use that same scientific rigor that goes into developing that kind of an assessment in developing our EQI assessment that this leadership report is based on, so that you can know that there's a lot of scientific rigor behind this assessment and the results will be accurate. So let's just talk a little bit about the model that this assessment is based on. Again, for those of you who may not be as familiar with it, it assesses the way that we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information in an effective way. Now, before we jump into the heart of the webinar itself, we'd like to know who's on the line. So what is your experience with emotional intelligence assessments? And why don't we close that poll now and show the results? So it looks like many of the people on the line are our current EQI 2.0 customers. Welcome. We have a small percentage that use a different emotional intelligence assessment, and about 24% of you do not currently use an emotional intelligence assessment. So I am now going to pass it over to Justin to walk you through our agenda and talk to you a little bit about our Leadership EQ 360 report. Justin?
Thank you, Daniela. As Daniela mentioned, my name is Justin Dionerine, and I will be walking you through most of the presentation today. So I'd like to start a little in a second with an introduction to the Leadership EQ 360 report. I will also discuss the links between emotional intelligence and leadership. I will talk about the development of the report, the features of the report. I'll give some tips on best practices towards 360-degree assessments. I will also go over our new norm and a brief overview of our entire suite of reports. Finally, I will pass the mic over to David, who will take you through generating the reports, and then Daniela will cover how you get certified. So for those of you who are already using the EQI or the EQ 360, many coaches use the EQ 360 on those in leadership positions, such as executives or managers. So there were many requests for an EQ 360 report with leadership-focused content. This report is in response to those requests. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with the EQ 360, the Leadership EQ 360 report is a 360-degree assessment with a leadership focus. The report can be used to examine the strengths and developmental needs of a leader. So the focus of the report initially examines how an individual assesses their own level of emotional intelligence. It then allows you to examine what these ratings mean in regards to an individual leader's ability. And then it finally incorporates the ratings of others and tells you how others view this individual as a leader. So before exploring the report itself, I'd like to explore some of the research underlying the report. And as a note to our current EQ 360 customers, In order to keep the terminology and language consistent, the research underlying the Leadership EQ 360 report is the same as that underlying the Leadership EQI 2.0 report. If you're interested in information beyond the content presented today, please feel free to refer to our report supplement for the leadership report. So most leadership research centers around our modern expectations of a leader. You may be familiar with some terms such as transformational leadership, authentic leadership, charismatic leadership, or even 21st century leadership. So these leaders are able to harness an employee's potential, are flexible in their approach to decision making, and their ultimate aim is to create leaders within their team. So much of the research suggests that high levels of emotional intelligence can predict leadership success, while low levels of emotional intelligence can help to predict leadership derailment. There are many examples of this connection in the research literature, so I'm just going to discuss a few examples here. So the research goes back as far as McClelland in 1999, who found that division presidents with higher EI had a 94% retention rate, and those with lower EI had a 50% retention rate. He also, in the same study, found that those division leaders with higher EI outperformed performance targets by 15 to 20%, but those with lower EI underperformed by about 20%. Our own Stephen Stein, the CEO of MHS, ran some research in 2009 where he found that top executives scored higher in 8 of the 15 subscales, at least compared to the general population. But a stronger finding in that same study was that leaders who demonstrated higher levels of empathy, self-regard, reality testing, and problem solving were more likely to generate higher profits for the company they were working for. In a meta-analysis in 2010, Harms and Creed found that emotional intelligence has been repeatedly found to be strongly linked to transformational leadership. More recently, in the past few years, these findings have been replicated in groups of nurses, IT professionals, in software organizations, petrochemical organizations, and within sales teams. Finally, a much newer finding is that higher EI in a civic leader or a politician is often linked with a greater desire to better lead and represent their constituents. So I'd like to first poll the audience and see which behavior you feel is most important in a strong leader. So I'm going to bring up the poll for you. And I'm going to close the poll in about 5 seconds. Okay, thank you for your participation. So as we can see, majority of you believe that all of the 4 leadership behaviors are equally as important, or all important. So the good news is the Leadership EQ 360 report supports all 4 of these leadership behaviors. So a review of the literature and our market research determined which leadership dimensions were most applicable to our consultants and administrators. So first, our market research revealed that there is a variety of models and tools in use today that have emotionally intelligent behaviors at their core. Many organizations have a customized leadership competency framework. So the Leadership EQ 360 report uses language and language terminology and these leadership dimensions in order to support these frameworks. A in-depth literature review revealed that the common behaviors in these models are these 4 leadership dimensions: authenticity, coaching, insight, and innovation. So in order to validate the link between emotional intelligence and these 4 leadership dimensions, we had to construct a leadership sample and identify an assessment which allowed us to measure the sample's effectiveness in these 4 leadership areas. So our sample consisted of 221 leaders from a variety of organizations throughout North America. Majority of their roles consisted of CEOs, directors, and managers. Many of the leaders worked in large organizations of over 400 employees, and most of the leaders worked in organizations with an annual revenue exceeding $10 million. So our sample completed both the EQI 2.0 and the MLQ, the Multi-Factor Leadership Questionnaire. The MLQ assesses the following type of approaches to leadership. Laissez-faire leadership, where leaders are passive or avoidant. Transactional leadership, where leaders who are leaders who focus on exchange relationship and use rewards and punishment to get the job done. And transformational leadership, which is our current gold standard of leadership. These are engaged leaders who harness employee potential and aim to create new leaders. So the EQI 2.0 results were correlated with transformational leadership in order to determine which subscales contribute to each leadership dimension. And we also correlated our EQI 2.0 results with laissez-faire leadership to see which subscales contribute to leadership derailment. These links, in combination with the established leadership dimensions, became the basis for the leadership potential sections of the Leadership EQ 360 report, which I'll explore in a few minutes in our features section. So how do we know that this sample is actually different from the general population? How do we know that these leaders are representative of what we state leaders should be? So I've included a graph which shows the leadership sample scores on each of the composite measures. And also, I compared those to the general population. So if you note the orange line, the sample of leaders, there's a significant gap. They are significantly higher than the general population. So I'd like to move into the features of a report. But before I do that, I'd like to know from the audience, which features of a report do you find most helpful, or do you think you would find most helpful? Alrighty, the poll is now closed, and I shall share the results with you. So as we can see, about 40% said that they would like to see a comparison between how a leader rates themselves and the opinions of others or of their raters. So this is the category that had the most votes, but I will speak to each of these 4 options. So if you picked another option, don't worry, we still have something in the features for you. So the first section I'd like to give you an overview of is our executive summary. So if you picked option A, an overview of a leader's strengths and weaknesses, this will be of particular interest to you. This page allows you to quickly see a client's top 3 and lowest 3 scoring subscales, and allows you to quickly pinpoint where a client excels and where the client may need some development. The next section is an overview of your client's results. This provides you your client's total EI score, their composite scores, and all 15 subscale scores. Now, you may notice on this page that there are yellow bars above each of the bar graphs. This is our leadership bar. So for those of you who picked option D, a comparison to a comparison of your client to top leaders, this will be of interest to you. So this allows you to compare your client's scores to the top 50% of our leadership sample. In doing so, you'll allow your client to maximize his or her leadership capability by focusing their development in these areas in which they scored lower than other successful leaders. So I'll use impulse control, the very bottom bar, as an example, the bottom green bar. This particular client scored about 100. Or scored exactly 100, and they're falling just short of the leadership bar. If they wish to maximize their leadership capability, it would be important for them to improve on this, perhaps raise it by 5 or 10 points throughout the span of their development efforts, and then they'll fall in comparison to successful leaders. So the leadership potential sections might be of interest to those who picked option C, an evaluation of a leader's risk of leadership derailment. So we have 2 sections. The self-report based leadership potential section examines your client subscale scores in the context of our 4 leadership dimensions. Again, authenticity, coaching, insight, and innovation. So in essence, if a client wishes to improve in these areas of leadership, they can do so by improving on the related subscales. In this example, for authenticity, this client, if they were looking to improve their abilities in the authenticity leadership dimension, they could improve on self-regard and independence. Additionally, this page allows you to examine your client's risk of leadership derailment. These subscales are those with the strongest link to laissez-faire laissez-faire leadership. And an example in this case, this client, if they wanted to reduce their risk of leadership derailment, they could improve on their independence. Now, we considered that it would be ideal to have the 360-degree feedback to determine whether or not others agree with the client self-ratings in these areas. So our next leadership potential section is one that incorporates leadership feedback, rater feedback. So you'll note that there are icons all over the page. So each icon represents either the client self-rating, in the case of the S icon, or the average rating of a rater group. So there's the managers, the peers, the direct reports, family and friends, and others. So this section allows you to quickly compare your client's self-ratings to those of their raters. So for example, in impulse control, you'll see a low level of agreement. The icons are very spread. However, in independence, there's a high level of agreement. The icons are very clustered. And in fact, in this case, all sitting on top of each other. So for those of you who picked option B, a comparison between how a leader rates themselves and the opinions of others, the profile gap analysis page will be very important to you. This page gives you a general overview of the level of agreement between your client and his or her raters. The 15 subscales from the EQI are plotted according to level of agreement on the x-axis and the client self-rating on the y-axis. Now there are two important regions on this graph that I'd like to focus in on. The first is the right half of the graph containing the allied strengths and reinforced opportunities quadrants. This is where there's a healthy level of awareness and a high level of agreement between the client's ratings and the rater's ratings. The other important section is the blind spots, the two blind spot quadrants. This is where an awareness gap exists. There's a low level of agreement between the client's self-ratings and the ratings from the raters. These act as great areas for further coaching and further development. The final feature I'd like to take you through are our subscale pages. Now please note there are 15 different subscales, and we have a respective self-report and rater-based page for each of the subscales. We're only showing you one as an example of what to expect on each of the 15 pages. So on the left we have our self-based our self-report subscale pages. So there are four main sections. The first is an interpretation of your client's score. The second are the associated leadership and organizational impacts. The third are strategies to help leverage this EI skill to reach your client, his or her full potential. And the fourth is an optional balancing your EI section, which helps the client understand the importance of achieving balance between their EI skills. On the right is the rater-based subscale pages, which gives a description of how the client has rated themselves, how the raters have rated them, where sources of agreement and disagreement exist between the ratings. So the first section provides an overview of the level of agreement between your client and all of their rater groups. The second is the biggest gap section, which highlights the rater group and the rater group that had the least agreement with your client's self-rating. The third is the closest agreement section, which highlights the rater group who had the most agreement with your client's self-rating. And the fourth section is an item response table, which provides the questions which were relevant to the subscale, how your client answers each question, and the average response from each rater group to each item. This allows you to quickly see where each of the rater groups agreed or disagreed the most at a glance. So the next thing I'd like to share with you are some tips for 360-degree feedback assessments. So the first tip that I'd like to share with you is it's very important to communicate with all parties prior to sending the invitations. In this communication, you should convey to all parties that their participation will help the raidee identify personal strengths and facilitate their personal growth. In this communication, you should also provide detailed instructions, including the purpose of the assessment, such as why emotional intelligence is being measured and why the participant was selected. Discuss raider anonymity. Discuss the importance of providing honest responses and feedback, and also state that they are free to withdraw at any time without penalty. Allow some time for your participants' concerns to be addressed before sending administration instructions. And when you complete the entire EQ 360 process, you should develop an action plan and follow up with your client. Many of you have an action plan template already, but if you don't have one, one is provided with all of our EQ 360 reports, including the Leadership EQ 360. So we also reached out to our network of coaches for their advice on best practices. So here are some of the responses. Ed Hennessy states one of his pieces of advice is to ensure the quality of the raider group for trust and a clear and meaningful relationship. Jeff Furman suggests that we should not tie the results of an EQ 360 to a performance review. And finally, Drew Bird suggests that we should coach clients on how to best select raters. Encourage the clients to pick a representative sample of who they interact with and use a reasonable number of raters. More is not always better. So before I wrap up, I'd like to take you through our North American EQ 360 professional norms. So the professional norms set the bar higher for your client. So his or her ratings are compared to how other professionals are rated rather than the general population. To construct these norms, we gathered the responses from 2,400 respondents and had them rate a professional in their network. Majority were from the United States, but there was a sizable amount of respondents from Canada also. And it's important to note that we have counterbalanced our sample to include equal numbers of males and females within each of the age groups and each of the rater types. So manager, direct report, peer, family, friends, and others. Most of the ratees were in the areas of business, medical, or education. But they still came from a variety of employment areas. And it's important to note that over 50% of the ratees were in a management position, such as senior executive, senior manager, or manager. Now, what I'd just like to show you on this slide is a quick example of what would happen to a client's ratings if they were scored with the general population norm compared to this new professional norms. So if this example report is scored with a general population norm, many of their ratings would fall in the high range. Their scores would be above 110, and this includes the total EI score of 114. As a result, the raters are saying that the client's EI skills are better than the North American general population. If the report is scored with the professional 360 norms, on the other hand, many ratings fall into the average range, such as the total EI, which falls to 107. As a result, the raters are stating that the client's EI skills are typical when compared to North American professionals. As the benchmark is set higher, there's a noticeable drop in scores. So, some food for thought. I'd like you to think about your own mix of clients. Which norm would you use for each individual client? Are there some that would be better compared to the general population? Or maybe there's others that would be beneficial to have a raised bar to be compared to. So the last thing I want to take you through before I hand it over to David is a complete overview of our EQ 360 suite. Prior to the release of the Leadership EQ 360 report, we had only one 360-degree feedback report, and leadership-focused content could only be found in the self-report-based EQI 2.0. Now, with the release of the Leadership EQ 360 report, the EQ 360 now has the option of leadership-focused content. The original EQ 360 has been renamed the Workplace 360, but don't worry, the report itself has not been altered. So I'd like to pass the mic over to David right now, and he can show you how to generate a Leadership EQ 360 report on our portal.
Well, thank you very much, Justin, and a huge hello to everybody, and thank you for joining us. As Daniela said, my name is David Wieczorek, and I will be leading you through the report generation process for the EQ 360 Leadership Report. After you log in to our TA portal, select the EQ 360 icon. Then select Report from the left-hand menu. We currently have two reports available, the Workplace Report and the new Leadership Report. Select the Leadership icon. Your next step is to select the participant. This is the individual that you are going to generate the report for. This individual needs to have completed the assessment, so make sure, if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, make sure that they have a status of completed or scored. You select the participant, and the next step is to select the raters. These will be the people who have completed an assessment rating your participant. Justin already pointed out that we have icons that show you the relationship between the rater and the participant. So you can include the manager. You can include people from the peer group. You can also include other individuals. However, if you are selecting individuals where there are less than 3 raters for a specific group, they will be classified as others in the report. This is to ensure confidentiality. You would click OK and move on to the template page. This is where you get to decide how your leadership report is going to look. You can use our default template, or you can create your own template. You can include a logo on the front, a new title. You can select a language for the report. You can select a different norm region or a norm type. If you select a norm type, this will apply to both the participant and the raters as well. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom of the page, this is where we have all of our report options, the report options that Justin described. Now, the default is to include everything. However, you are able to click some or all of the options off if you did not want to include them in the report. You click Next, and you move on to the review page. This is where you are able to go through and see everything that you have included in the report. If everything is all right, you click Ready to Purchase, take a final look at who your participant is, who your raters are, and you then click Place Your Order. If you wish to print a receipt, you click Print Receipt. Otherwise, to view your report, click the My Reports tab at the top of the page. And here it is. You have both a client report and a coach report. To view the report, you just click the link, and you can then download the report onto your computer. Now, that is the process for generating a report. I do want to point out to everybody that we do have on the TA portal a huge resource center. At the top of the page, you click Resource Center, select EQI, and you will see that we have a wealth of resources. This includes videos, PDFs, and other websites. If you scroll down, you'll see that we have many marketing resources, including you can download sample leadership reports. Just click on the link and it will download the PDF onto your computer. At the bottom of the page, we have a list of webinars associated with the EQI, and this is where we will be posting today's webinar. We also have numerous tutorials in which you can see how to use both the EQI and the EQ360. If you want more information on how to generate a report, click the Generating Reports link in the bottom of the page. Thank you very much, and I'm now going to pass it back to Daniela.
Okay, thank you so much, David. And just before we get to your questions, just want to talk a little bit about how to access the EQ360 Leadership Report. So for those of you who are certified, you can easily generate the report. There's nothing else you need to do but go into your portal account and start using the EQ360 and generate the leadership report. If you're not currently certified, you're not a current customer, there is a certification required. So as this is a level B assessment, both the EQI 2.0 and EQ360, there are two ways to access it. If you have a master's level course in tests and measurements, you can complete a qualification form online and gain immediate access. And if not, you can go through a certification program. We have a network of training partners worldwide, many of whom offer also virtual training. So please go on to our MHS.com site, click on the Talent Assessment button to find a training partner that fits your schedule. And as David pointed out, there are lots of resources and support here, just a few others. So our EQI User's Handbook on the left has a plethora of information there, including the report supplement that Justin mentioned earlier on that goes through the leadership sample and the leadership information. We have help files, so at any point as you're going through the process, you have a challenge, you can click on the help files to get more help in the moment. We have a couple of tutorials, one on how to generate reports in the EQ360 and one that walks you through EQI reports and takes you through at a self-pace the different reports we offer, including the EQ360. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Katie and Justin for some questions.
Thank you, Daniela. So one of the questions that has come in from the listeners is around the leadership sample. So Justin, I think it would be helpful if you explain the size of the sample and also just a reminder of how that appears in the report. So is that the yellow bar?
Okay, so the size of the leadership sample is 221 liters. And this does appear in the yellow bar, but we only use the top half of the sample. So the top 50% of our leadership sample is what creates the yellow leadership bar.
Okay. And just a reminder for the minimum number of raters that you need for each category. Can you go through each of the categories and explain how many raters you would need for them to appear in the report? Okay,
so the minimum number of managers is you only need one manager, but you're free to have more than one. For the other categories, direct report, peers, family, friends, you need to have at least 3 raters in order for that icon to appear in the report. If you have less than 3 raters in those categories, but in those categories combined you have 3, they will be moved to the other category and it will appear in the report as the other category.
Great, thank you. Another one which I think would be helpful to clarify because we now have this new leadership report is can you just explain some of the differences between the Workplace 360 report, so our original 360 report, and the new Leadership 360 report?
Okay, so the Workplace 360 report is our original EQ 360 report, which was the base for the Leadership EQ 360 report. The Leadership EQ 360 report has all the content of the Workplace EQ 360, but it also contains the leadership-based pages, such as the leadership potential sections, the executive summary, and the leadership bar. So essentially, the Leadership EQ 360 report is the Workplace EQ 360 report with new and added features.
Great. And another question just around the assessment itself. So how is the invitation sent out to complete the EQ 360? And does the ratee or the participant have the option to nominate their own raters?
Alrighty, so all invitations are sent out online. You can use our no reply at MHS.com email or your own personal email. Also, in regards to adding or nominating their own raters, you can nominate raters for your client, but you can also give your client the ability to nominate raters at the very end of their questionnaire.
Okay, one final question. Do you have to generate a self-report first, or can you just send out the self-invite and all the raters at the same time and complete the 360 report on its own, or do you have to have an individual report first?
So no, you do not have to have the self-report EQI 2.0 finished first. You can send the EQ 360 on its own, but if you do have the self-report for your client finished first, you can import those results into an EQ 360.
Great. I think that's all the questions for now. There's a few others that I will get back to in the question boxes. They're specific to particular countries or norms or translations. So I will respond to those as we wrap up the webinar. But thank you very much for all your questions.
Okay, and so that brings us to the end of the Leadership EQ 360 webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. I know we had a number of people from all around the world, so thank you for taking out the time in your day, which I'm sure is a very busy one, to join us on this webinar. I hope that you found it useful. Please contact us, follow us, so subscribe to our YouTube channel. We have a very active LinkedIn group called the Emotional Intelligence Connection, and follow us at Twitter at EI Connection or at MHS_talent. You can also contact us directly. So if you have any more specific questions around the research behind the Leadership EQ 360 report or report-related questions, so specific around the content, please feel free to contact Justin. Any other general inquiries, you're always able to contact our growyourbusiness@mhs.com mailbox. Once again, thank you so much for joining us, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.